In 2016, the small town of Mill Creek, Illinois, felt like the kind of place untouched by time. Halloween night had always been an innocent tradition there. Parents took their children trick-or-treating down quiet, tree-lined streets while porch lights glowed orange against the autumn chill. Local deputies directed traffic near the town square, where teenagers sold hot cider for charity. It was the kind of night where nothing bad was supposed to happen, where people still trusted their neighbors. Around 8 p.m., the first reports came in. Residents on Maple Drive described a man standing silently under a streetlight, wearing a carved pumpkin over his head. They said he wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, just standing, watching. Some thought it was a prank. One family even took photos from across the street, laughing at how committed he seemed to the act. But as the night went on, sightings began to multiply. Witnesses reported seeing the same figure on Oak Avenue, then Birch Street, and later near the elementary school playground. Every description matched: tall, silent, and that eerie pumpkin mask glowing faintly from within. By 8:45, people realized he was moving faster than anyone could walk between locations. Nobody saw him leave, but he kept appearing somewhere else. Some joked online that Mill Creek had its own Halloween ghost, tagging their posts with #PumpkinMan. But at 9:02 p.m., laughter turned to panic when the police scanner crackled to life with a new call: a child had gone missing. 10-year-old Amber Wilson hadn't come home from trick-or-treating. Her father said she'd been right behind him, until she wasn't. In that single moment, the night's harmless unease transformed into dread. The trial of Eli Stroud began almost exactly 1 year later, on October 28, 2017. Reporters filled the courthouse as families of the victims sat clutching photos of their children. Prosecutors painted Stroud as a calculating predator who used Halloween's chaos as camouflage. They presented over 200 pieces of evidence: the preserved masks, the Polaroids, the wax drippings, the DNA from Amber's costume. The defense argued insanity, claiming Stroud suffered from a delusional disorder that blurred the line between art and ritual. During his testimony, Stroud rambled about the harvest, insisting that each Halloween demanded a sacrifice of fear. He spoke calmly, almost academically, as though lecturing on folklore. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder and multiple counts of abduction. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. When asked for a final statement, Stroud looked at the courtroom and said, "Fear keeps the world honest." His words echoed through the silence before guards led him away. Outside, storm clouds rolled over Mill Creek. For the first time, the annual Halloween parade was canceled. Parents refused to let their children dress up. The holiday had become a reminder of what was lost. In the years that followed, Mill Creek tried to reclaim its sense of safety, but the scars remained visible. Houses that once glowed with jack-o'-lanterns now kept their porches dark. The town council replaced trick-or-treating with a "Safe Halloween" event inside the high school gym, guarded by deputies. Still, rumors persisted. Some residents claimed to see flickers of orange light in the woods every October 31st, always around the same hour Amber disappeared. Police investigated each report, finding only pranksters, or nothing at all. Yet the fear never truly faded. A local pastor began holding candlelight vigils, reading the names of the missing while families wept quietly in the pews. The phrase, "Pumpkin Man," became taboo. People referred to him only as the Mask. Newcomers to Mill Creek often didn't understand why no one decorated for Halloween, why every porch stayed dark. Locals simply said, "We don't celebrate that here anymore." Over time, the tragedy turned into cautionary folklore, a chilling reminder of how quickly a tradition of joy could become a stage for evil. In 2020, while transferring old case materials to digital archives, technicians stumbled upon a damaged flash drive labeled Bridge Cam 2. It contained corrupted dash cam footage from the night of Amber's disappearance. After weeks of restoration, they recovered 37 seconds of video. The clip showed deputies searching the railway bridge, their flashlights sweeping across the fog. Then, at the edge of the frame, a tall figure appeared, barefaced, holding the pumpkin mask at his side. His expression was calm, almost serene. He stood motionless as patrol cars passed, candlelight flickering on his fingers. When one cruiser's spotlight turned his way, he raised the mask slowly, covering his face before stepping backward into the darkness. Experts later concluded it was Stroud himself, deliberately revealing and concealing his identity as part of his ritual. The footage leaked online, spreading across true crime forums and social media, reigniting public obsession. Viewers debated whether the video was authentic or staged, but investigators confirmed its timestamp matched the night of the abduction. The haunting image, Stroud half-lit, half-hidden, became the lasting symbol of the case, fear captured in motion, forever tied to Halloween. Even years after Stroud's arrest and conviction, the town of Mill Creek remained haunted by what had happened. Psychologists reviewing his journals noted a recurring phrase, "Fear is tradition." Stroud had written obsessively about Halloween as a ritualized expression, a night when society allowed itself to acknowledge mortality and danger. To him, the terror he caused was a gift, something necessary, he claimed in court documents. Law enforcement profiled him as a classic organized offender, highly meticulous, socially intelligent, and ritualistic in his behavior. The preserved masks, the candlelit photographs, the dashcam footage, all indicated that he had carefully staged every encounter, controlling the timing, visibility, and effect of his appearances. Families across the region continue to be wary of Halloween nights, sharing stories of the Pumpkin Man with their children as cautionary tales. Annual, Safe Halloween, events tried to replace traditional door-to-door activities, but the fear lingered. Every year, neighbors would recall the pumpkin-faced figure standing under streetlights, its hollow gaze unnerving, and the reality that a seemingly ordinary man could carry such darkness undetected. The case became a study in how obsession, ritual, and opportunity intersect to create terror, demonstrating the subtle ways predators exploit community trust and tradition. For Mill Creek, Halloween was never just a holiday again, it was a reminder of what had almost been lost in the fragility of perceived safety. Today, the stretch of Maple Drive where Amber vanished is fenced off, marked only by a single, unlit pumpkin left quietly on the curb each year by anonymous residents. Her family moved away, but the memory of that night lingers, and locals still avoid trick-or-treating in the old neighborhood. Law enforcement continues to study Stroud's case, using it to train officers on profiling ritualistic offenders and understanding how carefully planned behavior can hide behind familiar settings. The terrifying part of the story, investigators say, was not just Stroud himself but the ordinariness of his existence. He had lived among his victims unnoticed, blending into the community until his obsession erupted on that one fateful Halloween night. To those who survived the ordeal, the lesson remains stark: evil can wear a mask, and sometimes it smiles back at you from a pumpkin-lit street corner, waiting, silent, until you notice. Even with justice served, the impact of that night continues to ripple through Mill Creek, a chilling testament to how fear, once seated, can linger far longer than any holiday. Story 2: The Radio Station Caller. It was a cold October night in 2018 when Jason Keller, a veteran late-night DJ at WRVH 104.7, signed on for his Halloween special. The station's slogan, "Stories that keep you up," had drawn listeners from across the state, all looking for a thrill in the dark hours. That night's show promised an immersive experience, eerie music, chilling local legends, and the opportunity for live callers to recount true accounts of fear. The studio was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a warm glow across the control board. Outside, wind rattled the siding and dead leaves skittered across the parking lot. Jason had been on air for only 15 minutes when the first call came through, a distorted voice whispering about a shadow seen in an abandoned house. He laughed nervously, assuming it was a prank. Yet, the voice had an unnerving cadence, calm but insistent, almost rehearsed. Jason cued the delay and played it over the air. Listeners texted in excitedly, some claiming the voice sounded familiar, others convinced it was a pre-recorded clip from a viral horror video. What he didn't know was that this call was only the beginning, the opening note of a nightmare that would unfold live on the radio, and that it would blur the line between entertainment and real danger in ways no one could anticipate. Minutes after the call ended, another came in, this one more urgent. The caller's voice trembled, whispering that someone was watching the studio through the window. Jason glanced toward the glass, half expecting it to be a local fan or friend playing a trick. The parking lot, illuminated by a single flickering lamp, appeared empty. He assured the caller that no one was there, but the voice insisted, "He's outside. I can see him moving." Jason's pulse quickened. The station's cameras didn't capture anything unusual, yet a small, inexplicable shadow shifted across the frosted glass. The caller continued, describing the figure in detail, tall, wearing a long coat, holding an object too dark to identify. Each description matched nothing Jason recognized from the parking lot, which remained eerily silent. The broadcast, however, went on, and thousands of listeners heard every word. Some laughed, thinking it was part of the show, others texted in panic, urging him to call police. As Jason continued reading the caller's details aloud, he couldn't shake the creeping dread in his stomach, a feeling that the story wasn't coming from a prankster, but from someone who was seeing something real, and terrifying. By 1:15 a.m., the pattern was clear. Calls poured in every few minutes from the same number, each describing increasingly specific movements outside the station. Shadows flickering across alleyways, footsteps echoing against the concrete, a parked car's headlights turning on and off without warning. Jason, trying to maintain his professional composure, signaled the station manager for guidance, but she was out for the night. The line went dead momentarily, only to return with a whisper, "You're on the wrong side of the glass. He can see you." Jason froze, gripping the microphone. The station had a small lobby with glass walls separating the on-air booth from the entrance. From his vantage point, he could see the empty parking lot and the faint silhouette of trees swaying in the wind, but no person. Then came the sound of scraping against the metal doorframe, faint at first, then louder, deliberate. Listeners called in frantically, some claiming they could hear it too, transmitted directly through the broadcast. Jason turned off the speakers, hoping to isolate the sound, but the scraping continued, synchronized perfectly with the distorted voice on the line. Fear now replaced curiosity. What had started as a spooky late-night show was fast becoming a hostage situation of the mind, and possibly the body. Panicked, Jason contacted local authorities at 1:32 a.m. Officers arrived within 10 minutes, their flashlights cutting through the dense night fog. They circled the building methodically while Jason stayed inside the booth, hands shaking, narrating the events live on air. The calls had not stopped, the same number pinged repeatedly, the voice describing the police movements as though observing them from the shadows. "They're close, the caller whispered. The officers outside reported nothing, no footprints, no vehicles, no disturbances. Yet, the broadcast continued to carry every word, every eerie observation, directly from the unseen watcher. Jason's listeners were riveted. Call-ins flooded the studio, half excited, half horrified. For those tuning in, the line between performance and reality blurred completely. Inside, Jason realized he could no longer tell if the voice was prank or predator. The shadow that may or may not have existed outside the glass felt as real as the fear building inside the studio. Something, or someone, was orchestrating the night with meticulous precision, and the only evidence was the live broadcast and a voice that refused to end. Inside the WRVH studio, tension was palpable. Jason sat frozen behind the control board, the microphone still hot, his knuckles white from gripping the edge of the desk. The studio's small lobby window showed nothing but darkness and fog, yet the repeated description from the caller made him doubt his own senses. Every minute, the voice on the line detailed actions Jason could not verify, footsteps pacing along the walls, shadows moving just beyond the light's reach, a figure supposedly standing at the corner of the lot, watching, waiting. It was as if the caller had a direct line into the building, or worse, was guiding someone with knowledge of the interior. Officers outside radioed in periodically, each confirming that the area appeared empty, yet Jason could hear faint sounds, scratches and taps, echoing within the studio, perfectly timed with the call. Sweat ran down his neck as he realized that every moment was being broadcast to thousands of listeners who, unknowingly, were sharing in his terror. Text messages and live chats surged. People argued whether it was a prank or something real. Jason, normally calm and practiced at narrating horror, felt a primitive fear clawing at his chest. The voice said something chilling next. "He knows you're listening, Jason. He can see your hands." The studio lights flickered. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow leaning in from the lobby, but when he turned fully, nothing remained. That instant of doubt, was it paranoia or reality, was exactly the point the caller wanted to make. The psychological grip tightened. Jason realized this was no ordinary prank, but a deliberate act of terror, and he was trapped, speaking into the microphone as the unknown watched. Officers arrived on Maple Drive within minutes. Patrol lights painted the quiet houses in alternating flashes of red and blue. Amber's father, visibly shaking, told them she'd been dressed as a vampire princess. She'd only been 2 houses away when she disappeared. The search began immediately. Neighbors joined in, calling her name under the dim streetlights while police canvassed door to door. Then one deputy noticed something odd, a trail of candy leading down the narrow path between 2 houses, a shortcut kids often used to reach the park. The trail ended at a wooden fence where something small was caught in the slats, a paper trick-or-treat bag, torn down one side, a bright orange ribbon tied around the handle. Officers marked the scene and widened the search perimeter. One woman, trembling, reported seeing a man standing at the end of the same path about 15 minutes earlier. She said he was tall, wearing dark clothes, and that same pumpkin mask tilted slightly as if he were listening. When she shouted across the street to ask what he was doing, he turned and walked away without a word. Police immediately issued a local alert. Within half an hour, news outlets picked up the story. Helicopters were requested but grounded due to fog rolling in from the nearby river. Parents began pulling their kids off the streets. A neighborhood that had been alive with laughter now stood silent, broken only by the hum of patrol cars and the nervous whispers of families locking their doors. By 2 a.m., the calls had taken on a more sinister edge. The voice now described actions that seemed impossible to know, which officer had turned left, which camera feed had been adjusted, which exit Jason had chosen to glance at. It was as if the caller had eyes everywhere. Listeners noted the strange timing. The broadcast's sound picked up faint thuds, steps, and whispers just after each description, perfectly synchronized with what was being said. Some claimed the sound of breathing, shallow and rhythmic, could be heard through the microphones. Jason's fingers trembled on the controls. He considered ending the broadcast, but the line was still active. The caller's final remark in this segment was almost a taunt: "You can't hide. He's in every shadow." The officers outside rechecked the parking lot, scanning every inch with flashlights and thermal imaging, yet nothing appeared. It was a maddening contradiction. The terror described was tangible and precise, yet entirely invisible. By this point, the listener numbers had doubled, and social media was alive with speculation and fear. What started as a Halloween special for entertainment had transformed into a live, real-time psychological attack, and for Jason, the sense of vulnerability was suffocating. He was no longer a narrator. He had become the protagonist in someone else's story, entirely at the mercy of an unseen predator. Investigation into the caller's number revealed it was untraceable. The lines came in through a voice-over IP system designed for anonymity, making it impossible for police to pinpoint the location in real time. Every attempt to triangulate the signal failed. Even the phone company had no record of its origin. Jason felt a deepening sense of helplessness. Here was someone with the technical knowledge, patience for psychological manipulation to stage the event in real time, observing him, feeding information to the broadcast, and keeping him on edge. Investigators later theorized that the caller had a prior understanding of radio operations and possibly access to inside studio plans. Every word and pause in the broadcast seemed scripted, yet the fear was entirely real. For the listeners, this blurred the line between fiction and fact so completely that many reported nightmares, anxiety, and obsessive checking of locks and windows in the nights following the broadcast. Even months later, people described a lingering sense of being watched whenever they listened to late-night radio. One of the responding officers, Detective Mark Hensley, later recounted that night in interviews. He said he could feel tension even before entering the station, a low, psychological hum of unease that no ordinary prank could produce. You walk into a place where people are screaming at you, but it's just the mind playing tricks, he explained. Hensley noted that every sound seemed amplified in a foggy October night: the thud of a shutter, the scraping of boots, even the radio static itself. Despite checking every entrance, exterior wall, and alleyway, officers reported nothing tangible. Yet Jason, on air, continued narrating each detail as the caller spoke, bridging the gap between the terror that could not be seen and the terror experienced by the listeners. The line between reality and performance disintegrated. Hensley would later reflect that the night demonstrated the horrifying reach of someone who could manipulate perception so effectively. You could never really tell if he was there, but the fear he created, that was real, Hensley said. For everyone involved, the station became a liminal space, a haunted intersection between technology, obsession, and human vulnerability. As the night stretched on, authorities worked feverishly to find a lead. Every technical avenue had been exhausted, the caller was untraceable, VoIP signals had been masked, and every previous attempt to triangulate failed. Then, just after 3:15 a.m., an officer reviewing security footage from a nearby business noticed something subtle: a figure moving through the alley adjacent to the station, long coat flapping, a faint glint catching the light. While the image was grainy, the figure's timing corresponded almost perfectly with the descriptions being relayed on the live broadcast. The realization struck investigators like lightning: the caller might not have been inside the studio at all. Instead, someone was observing both Jason and the police response in real time, feeding details over the line. This revelation reframed the investigation. The focus shifted from a simple prank call to an orchestrated act of terror, combining technology, observation, and psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, thousands of listeners continued to tune in, hearing the same live narration that police now knew was not fictional. The tension inside the studio became unbearable. Jason's normally steady voice cracked as he read aloud the caller's latest description, detailing shadows moving past the entrance and an alleged figure lingering near the stairwell. Officers outside scrambled, checking every possible hiding spot, but found nothing. The caller's precision suggested not only planning but an intimate knowledge of the station's layout, broadcast timing, and human psychology. Every listener became unwittingly complicit in the performance of terror, their engagement feeding the perpetrator's game. By early morning, the story had spread across social media, and thousands of viewers were tuning in remotely via live stream. People commented with panic, fear, or fascination, but all agreed on one thing: it felt real. The psychological impact on the community was immediate. Parents called schools, instructing children to stay indoors, while local businesses shuttered early. News outlets labeled the event the Halloween Radio Terror, drawing attention nationwide. Psychologists later reviewed chat logs and social media posts, concluding that the broadcast created a phenomenon of mass anxiety. The fear wasn't tied to physical harm, they argued. It was the unpredictability, the unseen threat, the knowledge that someone was watching and narrating your every move, amplified by the intimacy of a personal voice over the airwaves. Even after the broadcast ended, thousands reported checking locks repeatedly, jumping at minor noises, or feeling eyes on them while alone. For a small town that had always prided itself on communal trust, this invasion of unseen observation proved devastating. After several days of forensic and technical analysis, authorities identified a potential suspect, a 38-year-old former radio engineer named Carl Whitman, who had previously worked at WRVH and maintained intimate knowledge of its systems. Whitman had left the station under unclear circumstances 2 years prior but retained access to certain networked equipment, which could explain the untraceable calls. Detectives discovered a pattern in his digital footprint. He had previously uploaded videos demonstrating how to hack VoIP lines and manipulate remote cameras. When investigators obtained a warrant and entered his residence, they found an array of technological equipment, microphones, cameras, computers with live feeds, and a collection of notebooks detailing the layout of the station and the broadcast schedule. Handwritten notes indicated he had been experimenting with fear for months, charting listener reactions in real time. Police also recovered recordings of previous broadcasts with manipulated sound effects designed to simulate footsteps, breathing, and movement, confirming the depth of his obsession. Whitman was arrested without incident at 7:42 a.m. on October 31st, the culmination of a tense 36-hour investigation. When confronted, he initially denied involvement, claiming he was only a technological consultant who enjoyed testing security systems. But evidence, detailed call logs, computer files, recordings, and the correspondence about the station's layout, was overwhelming. He eventually admitted to orchestrating the calls and staging sounds to create fear during the Halloween broadcast, insisting it was performance art, an experiment in suspense. Authorities charged him with multiple counts of harassment, inducing panic, and unlawful surveillance. The community breathed a cautious sigh of relief, but the psychological aftereffects lingered. Jason Keller, the DJ, described the weeks afterward as the most harrowing of his career, noting that even after the culprit was caught, the memory of an unseen, omniscient observer stayed with him and the thousands of listeners who had tuned in that night. Even after Carl Whitman's arrest, the town's unease did not disappear. Residents described feeling watched during the following Halloweens, and many refused to leave their homes at night, citing the broadcast as a permanent reminder that fear could be manipulated in ways previously unimaginable. Psychologists analyzing the case explained that Whitman's use of the radio medium amplified terror because it combined anonymity, proximity, and intimacy. The listeners' imaginations filled in gaps the perpetrator left intentionally. WRVH's reputation was permanently altered. The station instituted strict security protocols, limiting access and installing surveillance, but employees reported experiencing residual anxiety for months afterward. Parents no longer allowed children to participate in traditional trick-or-treating in the neighborhood near the station. The event became a case study in media-based psychological manipulation, demonstrating how modern technology could magnify primal fears in real time. Local schools invited experts to speak to students about online and technological safety, and workshops were held to teach communities how to maintain vigilance without succumbing to paranoia. Despite the arrests and public reassurances, the recordings of that night remained widely circulated online, ensuring that the terror Whitman orchestrated continued to affect listeners far beyond the original broadcast. The town had survived the incident physically, but emotionally, Halloween itself had become tainted, its innocence forever compromised. Years later, the story of the radio station caller remains a cautionary tale in true crime circles and among YouTube narrators seeking the perfect blend of suspense and reality. Jason Keller, reflecting on the incident, said that the most terrifying part wasn't the technical mastery or the deliberate orchestration of the terror, it was the certainty that an unseen observer could know so much about your every action and your environment, all while remaining completely invisible. Whitman's obsession demonstrated the unsettling potential of combining human fear, technology, and theatrical performance. Listeners who experienced the broadcast firsthand recall moments when the line between reality and entertainment blurred completely, the chilling effect of hearing their own lives narrated, manipulated, and dissected in real time left permanent psychological marks. The incident underscores a stark truth: fear can be manufactured, amplified, and distributed, reaching far beyond the intended audience. For the town of Mill Creek and the thousands of listeners, it remains a haunting reminder that some terror isn't born of ghosts or monsters, but from the human mind's capacity to create fear as both art and weapon. The Halloween of 2018 became etched in memory not as a night of fun, but as a night when the very medium meant to entertain became a conduit for true horror. Story 3: The Haunted Costume Shop. In 2017, the small town of Brighton, Ohio, was known for its quaint downtown and annual Halloween festivities. At the edge of Main Street stood Madeline's Costume Shop, a family-owned business that had operated for decades. The shop's shelves were stacked with masks, wigs, and elaborate outfits, attracting both locals and enthusiasts from neighboring towns. Yet, in the weeks leading up to Halloween that year, rumors began circulating of something unsettling happening within the shop's walls. Employees reported objects moving on their own, mannequins appearing in odd positions overnight, and faint whispers echoing through the aisles. On October 25th, a teenager named Emily Turner took a job at the shop, excited to earn extra money before Halloween. She noticed that certain costumes seemed unusually heavy, almost as if they carried some weight beyond fabric. The store was quiet in the evenings, the fluorescent lights flickering occasionally. It was on her first night working the closing shift that Emily first encountered something she couldn't explain: a mannequin dressed in a vintage clown outfit, standing in the corner, staring directly at her, despite her being the first employee to arrive. As she stepped closer, she swore its head had turned slightly. Brushing it off as a trick of the eye, she went to organize the shelves, unaware that what she was about to experience would change her understanding of the store forever. By 9:30, the Pumpkin Man had become the town's obsession. Social media was flooded with blurry photos, orange glows under streetlights, silhouettes on porches, and a chilling video of someone filming from their car as the masked figure turned its head slowly toward them before stepping out of frame. Witnesses described the mask as an actual pumpkin, not plastic, carved crudely, its grin jagged, its hollow eyes uneven, with a candle or small light flickering inside. Detectives confirmed later it wasn't store-bought but handcrafted, hardened with resin to preserve it. Whoever had made it wanted it to last. Officers interviewed dozens of residents, ruling out local pranksters. Then, just before 10 p.m., a patrol unit stationed near the old railway bridge reported movement. Dashcam footage captured a tall figure stepping into the headlights, wearing the mask, holding what appeared to be a child's ghost-shaped candy pail. The driver shouted for the suspect to stop, but within seconds, the figure vanished into the fog-drenched woods. The dashcam cut out briefly, showing only static. When it flickered back, the figure was gone. That was the last confirmed sighting that night. That night, Emily stayed late, taking inventory and preparing displays for the weekend rush. Around 10:30 p.m., she heard the faintest creak of the floorboards near the back of the store. Assuming it was another employee who had stayed behind, she called out, but no one responded. The air grew colder, and the fluorescent lights began to flicker more violently, casting the shelves into uneven shadows. Then came the whispers, soft at first, unintelligible, but gradually forming words. Emily froze. The whispers seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "Leave, leave now." She rushed toward the door, only to find it locked, the knob refusing to turn. Panicked, she checked her phone for service, but the signal had inexplicably vanished. In the corner of the store, she noticed the clown mannequin again, now closer to the main display, its painted smile appearing somehow wider, more menacing. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of being watched, her heartbeat quickening. She ran to the back storage area and hid behind a stack of boxes, trying to convince herself it was her imagination. Yet, from behind the boxes, she could see shadows moving along the walls as if something, or someone, was pacing the aisles. That night would be the first of many encounters that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural, and it marked the beginning of the darkest Halloween in Brighton's history. At first, the store owner, Madeline Carter, dismissed the stories as simple employee pranks. After all, Brighton was a town that loved a good Halloween scare, and the shop had been known to stage elaborate displays. But when Emily returned the next night with friends to show them the mannequin, strange occurrences escalated. Lights would flicker in sync with whispered words. Costumes seemed rearranged, though no one had entered the shop. One friend claimed to see a shadow moving quickly across the front window, but when she ran to investigate, the street outside was empty. Security cameras, when reviewed, captured faint, unidentifiable figures flitting through aisles, figures that were never visible during playback in real time. The staff began reporting feeling cold spots near certain mannequins, and some claimed the mannequins' eyes followed them even when they changed position. What had been dismissed as imaginative horror became increasingly difficult to rationalize. Employees started calling in sick, claiming anxiety and fear that made it impossible to work alone. By October 28, local rumors had grown. Some said the shop was haunted by a former costume designer who had died in a fire decades earlier, others suggested darker motives. But no explanation accounted for the terror Emily felt every time she stepped inside. On October 29, a local radio station, WBRT 92.3, decided to feature a live Halloween segment from Madeline's costume shop. They invited listeners to call in and share their experiences, promising a spine-chilling night of live storytelling. Emily agreed to participate, recounting her first terrifying encounter with the clown mannequin. As she spoke, strange noises echoed through the store, footsteps on the second floor, whispers behind the aisles, and the faint creak of swinging doors. The radio hosts, initially thinking it was part of the performance, began to notice anomalies. The static on the line seemed to carry faint voices, and listeners called in, claiming they could hear soft breathing and whispers that weren't coming from Emily's microphone. By the end of the hour, the broadcast had inadvertently captured multiple unexplained sounds and shadowy figures, sending local residents into a panic. The story became a viral sensation, drawing more attention to the shop than ever before, but with that attention came fear. The night would culminate in an incident that forced law enforcement to intervene, marking the beginning of a real-life Halloween horror that would grip Brighton in terror. That same night, as the radio broadcast ended, Emily stayed behind to close the shop. The lights flickered violently, plunging the aisles into shadows, and the temperature dropped sharply. As she walked toward the back door, she noticed the clown mannequin had moved, its position now directly in front of the exit, despite her previous placement near the corner display. Panic set in as she tried to push past it, only to feel the mannequin's plastic hand brush against her arm. Emily screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over a display of masks. The sound reverberated through the empty store, but the room remained eerily silent otherwise. Desperate to escape, she lunged for the back door, only to find it locked. She checked her phone for service, but the signal was gone again. Terrified, she crouched behind a display table, unable to move or breathe easily. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, a faint scratching sound came from the ceiling, followed by whispers, "You shouldn't be here, leave now." Emily, frozen in fear, felt a cold presence brush against her shoulder. She later described the feeling as, like being watched by something not human. Hours later, when law enforcement arrived after a concerned call from a neighbor reporting strange noises, the store was empty, and the mannequin was back in its original position. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence, only the lingering sense that someone, or something, had been inside with her. Authorities were initially skeptical, treating the events as either pranks or mass hysteria amplified by Emily's account. Officers swept the store for fingerprints, forced entries, or evidence of tampering, but found nothing. Surveillance cameras inside and outside the shop revealed oddities, shadowy figures that appeared and disappeared, lights flickering in patterns inconsistent with power fluctuations, and unidentifiable noises captured on audio feeds. One officer described a sense of unease while reviewing footage, noting that objects in the aisles seemed to shift subtly from frame to frame, despite no one being present. Local historians suggested that the building, built in the 1920s, had a long and unsettling past, including reports of accidental deaths, fires, and a small attic used for storage where mannequins had mysteriously appeared over the decades. Investigators remained skeptical but admitted the occurrences were unusual enough to warrant further study. By October 31st, the shop had gained notoriety online, drawing paranormal enthusiasts and thrill seekers, many of whom reported experiencing the same eerie sensations as Emily when they visited. The story quickly went viral. Clips from the live broadcast circulated on social media, highlighting the whispered sounds, sudden knocks, and Emily's panicked reactions. Listeners debated whether it was staged, but law enforcement confirmed that multiple independent witnesses had experienced similar unexplained phenomena in the shop. Bloggers, paranormal investigators, and YouTube storytellers flocked to Brighton, documenting the shop with cameras and recording devices. Overnight, Madeline's costume shop transformed from a quiet, family-run business into a location of dark curiosity, attracting both attention and fear. Emily reported that the mannequin's gaze seemed to follow her no matter where she stood, and some visitors claimed they could hear whispers when alone in the store, often repeating phrases like, "Leave before it's too late." The combination of live radio, first-hand accounts, and viral attention created a perfect storm. Fear had become a spectacle, and the shop itself seemed almost sentient in its ability to provoke dread. By November 2nd, a small team of paranormal investigators arrived, bringing thermal cameras, motion detectors, and EVP recorders. Their recordings picked up unexplained temperature drops, anomalous readings, and faint voices calling out names in the aisles. One investigator claimed that a mannequin seemed to shift positions on its own while being monitored, as if intentionally moving when no one was watching. Another reported that audio recorders captured breathing and faint whispers in rooms that appeared empty on video. Although the police did not officially endorse paranormal explanations, they were forced to acknowledge the unusual nature of the events. Residents began to stay away, reporting an almost tangible sense of menace from the store. Meanwhile, the story spread across Halloween forums and YouTube channels, cementing the shop's reputation as a real-life haunted location. What had begun as a harmless late-night job for a teenager had now escalated into an unsettling phenomenon, intertwining technology, perception, and fear in a way that would be remembered for years. By November 3rd, the incidents inside Madeline's costume shop intensified. Employees reported hearing footsteps in areas they had already checked, the sound echoing impossibly through the aisles. Masks were found on the floor, despite no one entering the store. One staff member described being followed by a mannequin dressed as a Victorian child. When she turned, it was several feet away from its previous location. Thermal cameras and motion sensors picked up cold spots and transient heat signatures that appeared and disappeared without pattern. Visitors entering the store reported feelings of dread, nausea, and the sensation of being watched. On one occasion, a patron captured video of a mask slowly turning its head while no one was nearby. Emily began documenting each event, noting times, locations, and the eerie whispers that seemed to accompany the apparitions. The shop owner, Madeline, faced a dilemma. The events drew attention, increasing sales, but the danger, real or perceived, was undeniable. Police had begun patrolling the area after several concerned calls, though they were never able to witness any unusual activity firsthand. Psychologists consulted on the case suggested that mass fear, combined with suggestibility and darkness, might have amplified ordinary events into a collective hallucination. Yet the physical evidence, moving mannequins, dislodged masks, and anomalous readings on cameras, defied simple explanation. It was increasingly clear that something beyond human manipulation was at play, and the staff began to feel that Halloween itself had invited a darkness into the store. On the night of November 4th, Emily stayed late to organize a costume display. Around 10:45 p.m., she heard a whisper call her name from the back of the store. When she turned, a shadowy figure was visible for a split second at the entrance before vanishing entirely. The air grew frigid, and the lights flickered violently. CCTV footage later revealed the figure materializing from the center of the store and disappearing toward the front door in less than 2 seconds, an impossible feat given the distance. When police arrived after a neighbor's call about noises, they found the store empty. The mannequin displays were untouched, but Emily swore that a figure had been watching her from the shadows. This incident was pivotal. It demonstrated that the occurrences were not only physical and auditory but seemed to interact with individuals directly, heightening fear and creating an almost sentient sense of menace within the space. Residents began reporting dreams of the shop, describing a feeling of being trapped among shifting mannequins and hearing whispers calling their names. Local historians and investigators began digging into the shop's past. Madeline's costume shop had occupied the building for over 50 years, but records showed that it had originally been a tailor's workshop. Several accidents and unexplained deaths occurred on-site decades earlier, including a fire that claimed a seamstress in the upstairs storage. Witnesses recalled strange occurrences reported by previous owners, including mannequins moving, clothing rearranging itself, and unexplained cold spots. The pattern suggested a lingering presence tied to the building itself, perhaps concentrated around objects like mannequins, masks, and costumes. Paranormal experts speculated that the combination of human objects, residual energy from past trauma, and the intensity of Halloween festivities might have created a concentrated haunting capable of interacting with the living. While skeptics attributed the events to human manipulation or suggestion, the evidence, photographs, audio recordings, and first-hand accounts painted a more disturbing picture, a recurring and escalating phenomenon that seemed to target specific individuals, often Emily herself, and others who remained in the shop after dark. The wooded area near the bridge was vast and unlit. Deputies formed search lines, flashlights cutting through the mist as K-9 units picked up faint traces from the torn candy bag. The dogs led them deep into the forest, following overlapping trails until one suddenly stopped near a dried-up creek bed. There, in the mud, were two sets of prints, large boot treads beside smaller sneaker marks. The smaller ones ended abruptly. Nearby, half buried in leaves, was the ghost-shaped candy pail, its tiny LED still glowing. Officers radioed in, voices tense. Backup arrived within minutes. For nearly 3 hours, they combed the woods, marking every footprint, every disturbance in the soil. The fog was thick, muffling even their own footsteps. One deputy later said he kept feeling like someone was watching them, just beyond the flashlight beams. At 11:46 p.m., with no sign of the suspect or the missing girl, the sheriff called off the search until dawn. As officers packed up, one turned off his flashlight and looked back into the darkness. He swore he saw a faint orange glow deep between the trees, like a candle flickering inside a face. The events reached their climax on Halloween night, when a live-streamed paranormal investigation was conducted inside the shop. Cameras captured multiple anomalies, mannequins shifting, masks tilting in unison, and shadowy figures appearing and disappearing within seconds. One camera caught Emily backing into a mannequin that had suddenly moved behind her, while another captured her flashlight being inexplicably turned off and back on again. Audio recorders captured whispers repeating phrases like, "Leave now," and, "It's watching you." Police were called when one of the live-stream viewers claimed they saw a figure moving toward the entrance, only for officers to find the shop empty when they arrived. Clips from the stream went viral, spreading across social media and YouTube channels, cementing the shop's reputation as a genuine source of fear. Residents avoided the store for months afterward, while thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts continued visiting, despite reports of intense fear, cold spots, and feelings of being observed. By the end of Halloween, Madeline's costume shop was no longer simply a business. It had become a dark legend, a place where fear manifested and lingered, transforming a familiar holiday into a chilling, real-world experience. In the weeks and months following the viral Halloween incident, Madeline's costume shop became both infamous and feared. Foot traffic decreased dramatically as local residents avoided the store, while paranormal enthusiasts, thrill-seekers, and YouTube content creators continued to visit, drawn by the legend of moving mannequins and whispering masks. Madeline herself admitted that she no longer felt safe leaving the shop unattended at night, often installing additional locks, cameras, and alarms. Psychologists studying the phenomenon noted the profound psychological impact of combining darkness, isolation, and suggestibility. For some, simply hearing about the store was enough to induce anxiety or nightmares. Emily Turner, the original witness, continued documenting occurrences for years, reporting that even in daylight, mannequins sometimes appeared in positions she had not placed them in, or masks tilted in uncanny ways. Local historians and police noted that while no human intruder could account for the incidents, the accumulation of unexplained evidence, including photographs, audio recordings, and first-hand testimony, pointed to something beyond ordinary pranks. Halloween itself took on a darker significance in Brighton, with families keeping their children indoors and community events shifting away from traditional trick-or-treating. The store became a cautionary tale, a warning that even a seemingly innocent place filled with costumes and decorations could become the epicenter of genuine fear. In Brighton, fear had found a home, one that intertwined history, suggestion, and unexplainable phenomena into a living legend that refused to fade. Years later, the story of Madeline's costume shop is still recounted in true crime and paranormal circles as a rare intersection of documented fear and unexplained activity. Observers note that what makes the shop uniquely terrifying is the combination of tangible evidence, moving objects, audio anomalies, thermal readings, and the psychological impact on witnesses, both live and remote. Emily Turner has described the experience as a trauma that defies conventional explanation, a feeling of being constantly watched, manipulated, and tested by something unseen. The shop continues to operate, but the legacy of that Halloween lingers. Visitors report an almost palpable tension as they walk through the aisles, and employees remain hyper-aware of the possibility of inexplicable occurrences. For YouTube audiences, the story illustrates the disturbing reality that fear can exist not only in the imagination but in physical spaces, amplified by human perception and history. In Brighton, Halloween is no longer just a celebration, it is a night that honors, and fears, the unknown. The haunted costume shop stands as a chilling reminder. Sometimes, terror is not conjured by folklore or fiction, but by the spaces we inhabit, the objects we touch, and the unseen forces that may linger, waiting for the perfect moment to remind us that fear is always close at hand. When the sun rose over Mill Creek the next morning, fog still clung to the trees like smoke. More than 100 volunteers showed up to search the woods. Parents, neighbors, off-duty officers, all combed through mud and underbrush in silence, terrified of what they might find. Near the edge of the creek bed, a deputy noticed something glinting in the light. It was wax, streaked across a smooth rock, melted into strange drips that had hardened overnight. Just below it lay a torn piece of purple fabric, part of a child's costume cape, scorched at the edges as if touched by flame. Investigators bagged it as evidence. Forensic teams confirmed later that the wax matched the type used in long-burning paraffin candles, like those used inside jack-o'-lanterns. As the morning went on, the woods became a hive of activity: crime scene tape, news vans, search dogs, and photographers capturing the horror of a town waking up to its nightmare. Around noon, a detective found footprints, boots again, leading away from the creek and toward an old service road that connected to the highway. The theory was that the suspect had parked nearby and escaped before the search began. Meanwhile, residents gathered near Maple Drive, clutching candles and praying. Reporters called it the Pumpkin Man case. But inside the sheriff's office, investigators began comparing notes with surrounding counties. To their shock, they found two earlier cases, both involving Halloween night disappearances, both with reports of a masked figure seen near the victims. The connection was undeniable. Detective Laura Baines, an experienced profiler from the Illinois State Police, was called in by noon. She reviewed the files spread across a conference table, each labeled by year and county. The pattern chilled her. In 2011 and 2013, children had vanished under nearly identical circumstances: Halloween night, suburban neighborhoods, witnesses describing a silent man in a homemade costume. The abductions always occurred between 8 and 10 p.m., and in both cases, the only clue left behind had been a candy container or part of a costume. No bodies were ever recovered. The crime stopped for 3 years, and then, nothing. Until now. Baines theorized that the offender was organized, ritualistic, and deeply obsessed with symbolism. The pumpkin mask, she said, wasn't random, it was ceremonial. When officers pulled traffic camera footage from roads near Mill Creek, one vehicle caught their attention, a dark pickup parked by the park entrance at 8:43 p.m., roughly the time Amber vanished. Its license plate was partially covered by mud, but the rear windshield bore a sticker reading Henderson Auto, Kirkland, Illinois. Detectives traced sales records from that dealership. Only 3 trucks of that model had been sold in the past year. 2 owners were cleared quickly. The third was a name that made Baines pause: Eli Stroud, a 44-year-old seasonal worker once employed at a traveling carnival that operated throughout the region until its closure in 2014. His employment records mentioned a reprimand, inappropriate behavior toward minors at Halloween event. By evening, a warrant was in place. Deputies drove out to Stroud's property, a decaying farmhouse 10 miles outside Mill Creek, hidden behind overgrown trees. The black pickup sat in the driveway, its engine still warm. Officers surrounded the house and announced their presence, but there was no response. When they entered, they were met with an overwhelming smell of rotting vegetation and candle wax. The living room was lined with shelves, each holding carved pumpkins in various stages of decay, some fresh, others hardened and shellacked like ornaments. Their faces were disturbingly expressive: grins, frowns, even screams. On the kitchen table lay newspapers, all with headlines about Halloween incidents going back more than a decade. In one corner sat a rusted freezer chest, padlocked. Detectives found a key in Stroud's jacket pocket and opened it. Inside, packed in dry ice, were preserved pumpkin masks, each carefully wrapped, each labeled with a year: 2011, 2013. 2016. The candle wax embedded in them matched the wax found in the woods. Stroud was found hiding behind the house, crouched near a compost pit, holding a knife and whispering, "They just want to be remembered." He was taken into custody without incident. At the sheriff's office, Stroud barely spoke. His eyes darted around the interrogation room as if tracking something invisible. When Detective Baines showed him the preserved masks, he smiled faintly. "They're not costumes," he said quietly. "They're trophies." He claimed he'd been restoring Halloween, that people had forgotten its purpose: to be afraid. "It's a night about fear," he whispered, "and nobody's afraid anymore." He insisted he hadn't hurt Amber, saying only that she'd joined the others. Investigators pressed him for a location, but he wouldn't elaborate. When they mentioned the photos found in his home, children trick-or-treating across multiple counties, he grew agitated, shouting that he only watched. Forensic teams later confirmed that fibers from Amber's costume matched material found in his truck. Still, no body had been located. Without it, the case risked collapsing under circumstantial evidence. That night, as officers processed Stroud's property, one deputy found a small wooden box hidden under a floorboard. Inside were Polaroids, dozens of children, all in costumes, smiling. On the back of each, a handwritten note, the year and the word, harvested. 2 days after Stroud's arrest, a volunteer search party returned to the woods near the old railway bridge. They were determined to find Amber, or any trace of her. The morning was overcast and eerily still, the kind of silence that makes every twig snap sound deafening. Around 10 a.m., a young deputy noticed a strange orange flicker between the trees. Beneath a tangle of wet branches sat a hollowed-out pumpkin, its candle still burning despite the damp air. Inside the pumpkin lay a child's silver charm bracelet engraved with the name Amber W. Nearby, half buried in the soil, investigators uncovered a small wooden box wrapped in burlap. Within it were old photographs of children trick-or-treating, each photo labeled by year and location. Many matched the unsolved Halloween disappearances that had haunted the region for years. It was the breakthrough police needed. The wooded area was declared an active crime scene, every inch was scanned, sifted, and documented. Late that evening, cadaver dogs hit on a spot near the creek. Under shallow soil they discovered fragments of a costume, shredded purple fabric and a single child's shoe. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Amber Wilson. The discovery transformed the case from abduction to homicide, and the evidence against Eli Stroud became undeniable. News outlets swarmed Mill Creek, dubbing the suspect the Pumpkin Man Killer. The town that had once celebrated Halloween with open doors now boarded them shut.